of the New Strategy Center. Thank you again for being here. And let me start in my introductory remarks with a sort of explanation, if you want, why a panel on frozen conflict. What is the rationale for such a discussion today? Because maybe you already know that conflicts are not a very popular issue. And for many people, frozen conflicts are, I don't know, a provincial issue or a trivial or at most regional issue. Not very significant in order to understand the global picture, strategic picture, or geopolitical picture of this region. And for us as an organizer, this is not quite accurate. In fact, we have a completely different perspective on frozen conflicts. We think that in order to understand the strategic future of this region, we have to take into account the frozen conflicts. The frozen conflicts are very important for the strategic future of this region, and this is the main idea of our panel. When I say our region, I mean the region between EU/NATO and Russia Federation. This region is not settled yet strategically. This is the reason that we are using metaphors. Gray area, buffer zone, cordon sanitaire, trade area, and so on and so forth. And the reason is that it's not settled yet strategically. And in order to, we understand that the main issue today is, of course, a sort of China, Russia, US-China relationship. It could be, I don't know, Thucydides trap, big bargain, whatever. But in order to pivot to Asia, when Europe will become a second military theater, nevertheless, this region should be settled in one way or another, should be stabilized in one way or another. And for many people, frozen conflicts or the resolution of the frozen conflicts could be a way to stabilize this region or to settle strategically this region. This could be a good idea, but could also be a not very good idea. Could be very problematic for us, for Romania in particular, because we are bordering this region 1,400 kilometers. So for us, it's very important how much Russia will be in this region, how much EU or how much US or how much NATO. So one of the key questions of this panel is a good thing it is a good thing to try to defroze the frozen conflicts today. And having in mind that if you look at the picture, you see the presence of Russia Federation at all the levels, from the presence of Russian troops on the ground, including Nagorno-Karabakh recently, to the language in which these conflicts are shaped. Even the language in which these conflicts are shaped has a lot to do with the Russian strategic interest. And talk about federalization, confederalization, special status, mediators, and so on and so forth. All these concepts, or many of them, has been shaped by the strategic interests of Russia. So if you look at this, massive presence of Russia and Russian influence, these frozen conflicts, the main question is it worth trying to defroze the frozen conflict today, having in mind all these realities? I give you just one example. There is a Romanian Minister for Foreign Affairs initiative co-sponsored by other 10 EU member states, Portugal, Sweden, and 8 East and Central European countries. And the initiative tries to involve EU in the frozen conflicts, even in the resolution of the frozen conflicts. And this is not a bad idea, of course. But if you look at the documents and all the documents which are emanating from this initiative, the name of Russia is not there. So actually, Russia is not mentioned in these documents. And of course, for tactical reasons, it's a tactical move, not mentioning Russia, in order to convince as many European country as possible to get involved in this initiative. But if you look back in August 11th in Chisinau, when Mr. Kozak was visiting, Chisinau, just very surprisingly visit of Mr. Kozak. And the main message sent by Mr. Kozak was that Transnistria is an internal issue of Republic of Moldova. So basically, we are not here. We are not in this picture. It's an internal conflict. Not necessarily ethnic conflict, but internal conflict. So don't talk with us about Transnistria. In fact, the same language, the same narrative Russians are using in Kiev. Two parts, we are not involved, don't talk to us about settling or conflict resolution. In spite of the fact that Russian troops are there, that peace treaty has been signed by Russian president and president of Republic of Moldova, apparently Russians are not in the picture. And a couple of weeks ago, in August in Kiev, 23rd of August, the president of Republic of Moldova gave a speech at Crimea platform, 3 minutes, 28 seconds. And the word Transnistria, Russia, frozen conflicts, occupation, Donbass, whatever, none of these words had been used or mentioned. So basically Russia was absent, was not there. So the president of Republic of Moldova, the Crimea platform was quite a platform for Republic of Moldova, 47 heads of states, prime minister, minister for foreign affairs, minister, and so on and so forth. And the president of Republic of Moldova did not use this platform to mention or to point out to the separatist conflict or the presence of Russia or even the EU resolution on the conflict, the Transnistrian conflict. So Russia is, again, absent from the picture. So basically, our question is this, and this, of course, is a question for the panelists, it's a question for you, it's a question for Q&A session. Is it worth doing this? I mean, how comes that our tactical moves are transforming themselves into a sort of strategy? What's the point to create a narrative in which Russia is not present? Is it helpful for us? Because this sort of strategy could be used by Russia in order to react or counter-react, saying that, okay, according to your documents, memos, papers, non-papers, initiatives, Russia is not part of these conflicts. If Russia is not part of these conflicts, why do you point at us? You can ask us to help you in these endeavors if you want to defrost the frozen conflicts or to settle these conflicts in one way or another, because we have experience, former USSR and so on and so forth, but we are not part of the picture. So somehow we normalize the perspective of Russia on these conflicts. And it could be problematic for these countries if you think in this way. It will be very difficult for them to try to settle the conflict in their national interest if this narrative will become the main narrative as far as the frozen conflicts are concerned. And all the Russian tools, or all this vision, perspectives of the conflict will become part of our way of understanding the conflicts. So that should be, I think, a question for us, not only for this panel. At the end of the day, we can get a sort of the tail wagging the dog thing. Because if you admit or accept the Russian perspective on the frozen conflicts, of course, at the end of the day, we'll have these countries controlled by the small, separatist regions, which will control the foreign policy or strategic policy of these countries. And at the end of the day, to paraphrase a famous saying, in our region will be settled strategically, but in the way that these countries are down, Russia is not necessarily in, but definitely the West is out. So this was the main rationale for organizing this panel, and I'm very glad to have the opportunity to chair this panel, and I'm very honored by having such a very distinguished panelist. And now I'm turning to the first speaker. It's Igor Munteanu from Republic of Moldova. It's former ambassador of Republic of Moldova to the US, and leading expert, and also former politician, so it's various angles. So, Mr. Munteanu, for 10 minutes, you have the floor. Thank you for being here, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. It's been a great pleasure to attend this event, and congratulations for the organizers, for the New Strategy Center, for conducting continuously an excellent venue for speaking about the global and regional issues, and also for something that is relevant to the resilience of states in Europe. And thank you, Mr. Chairman, for this generous introduction to the topics we have to tackle today. Indeed, Russians are using a very interesting and sophisticated terminology in order to hide their interest in the neighborhood, in the close neighborhood, Blizhny Zarubezhye, as they call it. First of all, they are for the respect of the international borders when the borders are outside of the area of their interest, and they are not interested in preserving the borders when the borders are related to the Blizhny Zarubezhye. And that was very close and imminent to discover in two cases. In the case of Kosovo, when the Russians protested vehemently for the recognition of Kosovo, and then suddenly they discovered they have territories to recover in Crimea and territories in Ukraine, Donbass and Luhansk. And of course, keeping the same rigid stance and the territories which have isolated themselves from the core nations or from the core states like Abkhazia, South Ossetia, and Transnistria. So, and the real question is not exactly related to the surprising visit of Dmitry Kozak. By the way, Dmitry Kozak is appointed by Kremlin in order to promote the economical and trade relations with the Republic of Moldova. He never meant it, and he never addressed the economical and trade relations. In fact, he's a kind of mentor, and in Russian language we call it curator, for Transnistria, and for keeping the same format where Russians have an important stake, and for using the Transnistrian issue as a kind of blackmailing instrument towards the aspirations of the Republic of Moldova to liberate itself from the legacy of the Soviet Union, and for becoming a proud nation to integrate itself with the European Union. The logical question out of the topic that is relevant to our panel is why, in spite of the substantial progress towards the resolution of the frozen conflicts have been made by UN, by OSCE, by European Union, the conflicts are still frozen. And the short answer is that as long as Russia keeps leverages and linkages strong enough to keep local actors under check, escalate fears of war, suppress reforms, disinform or corrupt elites, Russia will dominate the landscape, the institutional landscape, and Russia will be strong enough to keep the status quo of these conflicts. Old frozen conflicts are, in fact, geopolitical constructions, and they are leverages used by Russia to implement its policy. We call it the limited sovereignty doctrine. To some extent, this is the concept that has been employed in the Soviet time by Gromyko, with and smaller states, parts of the socialist and Soviet world by that time, but it has the same application in the newly independent states. Russia claims special rights in the ex-Soviet space, opposing to the concept of common neighborhood with the European Union, opposing the concept of common neighborhood, but in the same time actively exploring any viable splits, conflicts, or divisions, and everything that may feed up the conflicts in the territory of the newly independent states. First of all, and I will start by describing the anatomy of the frozen conflicts at this beginning of the panel. President Vladimir Putin derides the very idea of calling post-Soviet states as full-fledged states, because he himself believes, and Mr. Vladislav Surkov, former advisor to Vladimir Putin, say that the real states are only those with nuclear capabilities, which means that if you have nuclear capabilities, you are a real state, you can defend yourself. All the rest are simply provisional frames and provisional entities that do not have any kind of relevance. By the way, Mr. Vladislav Surkov was one of the main engineers of the separatism in Donbass and Luhansk in Ukraine. Second, borders in the ex-Soviet space are volatile and provisional. Due to the administrative gerrymandering in the time of the Soviet Union, and therefore Russia, under these circumstances, must fulfill a historical mission to recollect territories that belonged previously to the Soviet Union in a term that is called by Russians «собирание русских земель». This goal is very much endorsed by the political parties in power, Единая Россия, and by the conservative circles like Mr. Dugin, Prilepin from the cultural side and cultural world, and also by the military. Third one, Russia committed itself to protect the Russian mir, the Ruski mir, beyond the state borders, and applying since 2011 a so-called concept of responsibility to protect, and the entities or the individuals that speak Russian, feel Russian, and share Russian beliefs of a stronger Russian state. That was very much enshrined in the policy of sharing passportization. By the way, in the last 3 years in Donbass, there are more than 2 million of Russian citizens. An accelerated passportization process, 300,000 Russian citizens in Transnistria, and almost 90% of the population in both South Ossetia and Abkhazia that are they have received citizenship of Russia, and of course receiving financial allowances, benefits for being citizens of Russia, which is of course very much attractive to poor populations in these breakaway regions. Fifth, Russia is conducting a rather strategic and inconsistent position towards state sovereignty, since it claims support for state sovereignty and non-intervention outside of the region, as I mentioned before, while justifying its intervention within the Commonwealth of Independent States, which reveals a sort of dual normative order for Russia, regional and global. Global is very much in line with the international law. Regional is something that is protecting and is enshrining the idea of the государственность, the statehood-minded Russia. Russian theoretical choices can be explained by perceived loss or gain of influence on a territory, which means that this is a principle defended in the case of Kosovo to preserve territorial integrity of its protege, Serbia. But it was not a principle when Russia used responsibility to protect principle in order to acquire control over Crimea or Transnistria or Donbass and regions of Georgia. In showing an adamant resistance to the membership in NATO and the European Union for the newly independent states, Russia proposed its own integration plan based on 2 fields. First of all, it generated a sort of integration of the CIS Euro-Asian Union members and the collective treaty organization. Both they imitate European Union and NATO, and level 2, it is related to the alternative integration built on the community of unrecognized states. In fact, these are all Karabakh, that means Transnistria, South Ossetia, Abkhazia, and recently with the additional added territories from Ukraine, Donbass and Luhansk, they are part of the so-called Union of Unrecognized States. Originally, they were joined after 1992 by Srpska Republika and some other post-Yugoslav statelets, which left in 1995 after Dayton Agreement in former Yugoslavia. Later in 2008, in response to the Russian-Georgian War, Moscow recognized Abkhazia and South Ossetia as independent states, together with Vanuatu and some very exotical states, which provided a kind of self-recognition to these entities, but nevertheless, the main sponsor for the statelets which claim independence from their original states is, of course, Russia. All of them claim to have some elements of statehood, constitutions, ministers, and armed forces, They issue their own passports, never recognized and unrecognized by nobody, pretending they are de facto states, although they would not survive a week without direct sponsorship from Moscow. Needless to say that Russia continued to exercise full control over these territories, keeping for herself the state of a responsible actor. In fact, controlling these separatist territories, it is quite expensive undertaking. Therefore, Russia would like to see these territories somehow financed by external actors, but keeping executive control over these territories. An example from Transnistria. Transnistria enjoys the asymmetrical trade preferences, which is an agreement negotiated by Moldova with the European Union. They export almost $1 billion per year. Nevertheless, they do not pay any penny in the budget of Moldova. And of course, they use different leverages like monopoly and gas in order to keep for themselves the benefits and not paying for gas. Afterwards, Russia is asking the payment from the Republic of Moldova, saying that if you want a reintegration with Transnistria, you have to pay. In a couple of minutes, what is to be done under these circumstances, because this is a long story and it can be kept for a longer period of time. First of all, managing expectations. It seems fair to say that the quick reinsertion of these secessionist territories under the sovereign control of the Eastern Partnership states cannot be achieved today. Being trapped into this conflict, the way to go ahead is to impose conditionalities. Conditionalities and democratization of these regions, and conditionalities for foreign trade. This is tough, but this is the only way to achieve progress in the regulation of these conflicts. Second, the reconsideration of the past. The 5+2 format in the case of Moldova is a toxic format which does not provide the leverages in order to reintegrate these territories. First of all, because the sponsors of this conflict, including Russia, but also Mr. Frattini from Italy, when he was the president of OCAC, promoted the small steps approach, which means, in terms of Mr. Sokor, desovereignization of the original state, providing competences and attributions to the separatist entities, and providing a way to survive under tough circumstances. Third, every attempt of the Russian Federation to promote the federalization or confederalization agreement should be fought back in very tough terms, because this means the conservation of the leverages of control over Moldova and over Ukraine, probably, and over Georgia, in order to keep the status quo and, in the same time, buy time for the loyal elites in Transnistria and enjoy the benefits of the trade with the European Union. Finally, demilitarization. In 2005, myself, my colleagues, we presented the strategy of 3D in Bucharest. That was a very reasonable and strategical concept: demilitarization, decriminalization, and democratization of the region. Still, this strategy is the only way to progress towards the reinsertion of these territories of Transnistria, but with a lot of prudence and with a lot of international impact, when it will, the attention of the European Union will re-emerge in this sensible area. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Munteanu. And can you hear me? So thank you very much for perspective from Republic of Moldova. And the next speaker is Ambassador Pavlo Klimkin, is former Minister of Foreign Affairs from Ukraine, a perspective from Ukraine and the frozen conflict. Sir, you have the floor. We can hear you.
It's fine now?
Yeah, apparently it is. Yeah, could go on, yeah.
Okay. Good Good afternoon, everybody. It's great to be in this session, and I believe it's really kind of challenge for all of us to understand whether we could have one set of strategies towards the so-called frozen slash unfrozen conflicts. Just a couple of points. If you cast a look on our region, from Paris, from London, from wherever, the oversimplified picture looks like that. We have Putin and Lukashenko, and respectively Russia and Belarus, as clear dictatorships. We have Western societies, and somehow between them, we have us, Ukraine, we have Moldova, we have Georgia. And of course, we are democracies, no point about it. We have free and fair elections, we have free speech. It's all not ideal, but I would say we could be called kind of hybrid democracies. So what is the way forward for all of us? And so-called unfrozen conflicts is a big part of this question. And it's my first point. The second point, of course, all frozen conflicts have been generated, or better to say, are being generated and supported by Russia. No point about it. And Russia has been trying all the time to sell insecurity as a sort of commodity in stock exchange. It's a fundamental part of their strategy. And the only big change in their approach in recent years is a shift from a kind of military slash economical approach to hybrid approach, basically embracing everything in the sense of the impact. It's military, it's soft, it's so-called smart power, basically everything. So the sense, if you cast a look on Donbass, they've been trying to retain the mode of being able to turn off or to turn on the heat, to turn up the heat, to turn down the heat every second, like that. And what they've been doing around Ukraine is basically to create the same model of impact to Ukraine as they have now to Donbass. My third point, we can't, of course, we could find a lot of similarities in different frozen conflicts, including the role of Russia. But all the conflicts live firstly on the Russian impact, secondly on a special set of emotions, and they are pretty different in the case of Donbass, in the case of Transnistria, in the case of Abkhazia and South Ossetia. So they're really pretty different, and we can have a sort of consistent similarity here. But what is even more important for me, and it was clearly said in the first intervention, the moment the black and gray economy, and mainly black economy, not just criminal structures, but black economy supported by Russia, by Russian special services, and it all clearly divided in the sense of cash flows, and even supported in the sort of cash flows. The moment the black economy basically rules, it's a kind of self-ruling, self-managing reality. of course, supported by the Russians. The models are different for Transnistria and Donbass and South Ossetia, but fundamentally, it's a kind of decision, and it's always a political decision, and half criminal, half special service decision. What kind of black economy you are trying to create in all this region? And the more it's impacting frozen conflicts, the more cloud around these frozen conflicts, establishing new status quo, it's heaven. And to break these black economy schemes is sometimes far more difficult than to break political cloud around this conflict. So any sort of political solution without proposing any sort of way out for economy, any kind of business/economic model, and of course a new set of slogans, a new set of emotions, for me would never ever work. Neither for Donbass nor for Transnistria, and actually it's the same for Abkhazia and South Ossetia. My third point, and I will try to be as short as possible. What the Kremlin has been trying to achieve now is a crippling control of all this region, and even more so to project impact from this region on our states. The best example for that is a massive passportization effort. And they sent now to the State Duma of Russia a special draft law on passportization of Ukrainians and Belarusians on the pretext of self-identification. And it's indeed a Russian concept, a Russian strategy to project Russia as far as the Russian citizens are present, the Russian passports are present, and Russian as a language is present. So fundamentally, especially as the backdrop of events in Afghanistan, the Kremlin believes it should be a fundamental point of the Russian strategy to reload the so-called post-Soviet space, although I believe the sense of the post-Soviet space is not there. But for Russia is a fundamental existential, I would say, point to provide the impact and to start further actions in the former post-Soviet space, because it's a pretext for strengthening up the Russian regime itself. So my basically conclusion out of that, and I would be happy to discuss it further. I don't see any, and I mean any political will on the part of Russia to start mitigating this conflict. Actually, the other way around, and I believe it's gonna be about more Russian power play around this conflict. The second point, any sort of political solutions, missions, international organization missions would not work without changing emotion, changing propaganda patterns, and of course changing economy patterns for the frozen conflicts. And third, unfortunately, we do see that the keys from frozen, unfrozen, basically changing the mode for this conflict are still in the Putin hands. So fundamentally, the fate of these conflicts are are intrinsically interlinked with the fate of our states in Russia. And we can't find a separate solution for this conflict without basically the whole pattern in our region. And the sooner it's gonna get in flux with all kind of understanding, my understanding about the risks and challenges on security, the better. Let me make a stop here, and I would be happy to discuss it further. And I try to be a bit provocative and as tough as possible, simply to get, to inject a kind of different atmosphere in our discussion.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your very comprehensive presentation. And the third speaker in our panel is Ambassador Volker, is former U.S. Special Representative for Ukraine. But apparently, due to some technical issues, Mr. Volker is in Frankfurt Airport. He's not able to be with us, but he just sends his key points of his presentation, and let me very briefly to try to summarize his Ambassador Volker's main points. So, key points. A, with the exception of Nagorno-Karabakh, the term frozen conflict is wrong. These are active policies of Russia to create a conflict, not indigenous and not permanent conflicts absent Russia's deliberate actions. B, Russia does this to create dominance over the countries concerned, prevent them from being part of a larger Euro-Atlantic community, and perpetuate an empire myth internal to Russia that justifies authoritarian rule. And C, it's important to state all this clearly because failure to do so allows Russia to obscure its role, even as it continues these policies. So we thank Mr. Volker for this, ideas and points. And we go now to the next panelist. It's Ambassador Pierre Andrieu. He is former ambassador of France to the Republic of Moldova and Tadjikistan, and former co-chair of the Minsk Group on Nagorno-Karabakh conflict. Mr. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, I would like to underline that I'm very, very happy to be here at this very prestigious forum in Bucharest. This town I love very much, and I visited many times in the past. Allow me to start with the evidence that the resolutions of the old frozen conflicts in the post-Soviet space remains blocked to this day. I want just very quickly to recall then that historically these frozen conflicts result from the Bolshevik nationalities policy, terrorized by Stalin. This policy consisted of attributing to each nationality of the former Russian Empire a separate own territory as well as a national language. And often, according to the adage, divide and conquer, Moscow has grouped together different nationalities within common borders. This situation, which did not have much importance under USSR, became explosive after its breakup. Even before 1991, the Armenians in Nagorno-Karabakh started to claim their attachments with Armenia, and a war ensued between Armenia and Azerbaijan later on. Of course, Russia has taken advantage of these conflicts and other conflicts around the Black Sea to extend and strengthen its influence, particularly around the Black Sea. Moscow has posed as an arbiter in the area which it considers strategic for its interests. This Russian intervention is maybe the most important similarity among all these frozen conflicts. Moscow was always at the origin, the development, and the provisional settlement of them. and I am underlining the word provisional. The differences are in their nature. The transnistria is mostly linguistic. Moldova was willing to regain its Romanian language written in the Latin alphabet. The Nagorno-Karabakh is primarily national and not religious. The strong Armenian and the Azerbaijani nationalisms and nationalities being in an exclusive face-to-face. As for legitimization of the Russian peacekeeping monopoly, that is, I think, only partly exact. The United States and the EU are part, together with the Russian, is almost all the formats of negotiations. I can speak about the Minsk Group, where the Russian co-chair was always active, honest in his efforts, open and cooperative. He was always supporting all the American and all French initiatives, like summits or documents. But it is true that more broader on the Russian side, there is maybe a sort of schizophrenia in relations to this conflict. The Russian Mid may not always have the same interests as other ministers or administrations. My point too will be all these frozen conflicts could degenerate into open wars. If we exclude the open and bloody conflict in Donbass, which some say is becoming frozen, but that is of course highly questionable. The non-resolution of these conflicts carries the risk of degenerating into open wars. The tension remains strong around the Black Sea, especially in Ukraine and the South Caucasus, where Moscow tries to hold its positions firmly. Let's briefly examine the last year's sudden blast in Nagorno-Karabakh. It was mainly triggered by the aspiration of Azerbaijan to regain the occupied territories, by its efforts to rebalancing the military superiority at the expense of Armenia, and at the international level, by decreasing attention from the region from the United States and the EU, both primarily concerned by their domestic problems caused by the pandemics and the economic crisis, and of course by the elections, presidential elections in the United States. Azerbaijan, massively supported by Ankara, has won this war in particular thanks to the Turkish massive political and military support. By imposing the November 10 ceasefire agreement, Russia has achieved a diplomatic success, reinforced by the deployment of almost 2,000 Russian peacekeeper troops on what was the left of the Nagorno-Karabakh territory and along the Lachin corridor in order to monitor the ceasefire. However, the political deadlock remains, while Baku still does not want to discuss the status of Nagorno-Karabakh. Ankara emerged as a significant regional power in the southern Caucasus. In the diplomatic field, Presidents Erdogan and Aliyev signed on June the 15th the Shusha Declaration. That is a true strategic alliance entailing defense, political and economic cooperation. Turkey took the diplomatic initiative also by launching a new 6-state platform in the Caucasus that would include Turkey, of course, Azerbaijan, Russia, Iran, Georgia, and Armenia. President Erdogan has evoked also the installation of a Turkish military base in Azerbaijan, which has provoked a sharp reaction from the Russian Mid. In the economic field, Baku and Ankara have put back the rehabilitation of the old South Caucasus Railway, Kars, Gyumri, Nakhichevan, Megri, Baku, Derbent, which would allow the exclave of Nakhichevan to open up and directly link with Russia, Turkey, and Iran. But this project, because it provides the passage through Armenian territory, located between Azerbaijan and Nakhichevan, is already a source of tension between the two countries. By pushing too far in the North Caucasus, Turkey risks antagonizing Russia, which views the region as its own historical backyard. This Turkish presence has already been taken into account by Russia, as is Syria and Libya. Russia has established a very pragmatic and operational conflictual partnership with Turkey, which seems to meet until now both countries' interests. However, Russia knows the limits of his alliance and doesn't forget that Turkey is a NATO member. What's more, Turkey's presence in the South Caucasus and its potential projection in Central Asia is seen with concern in Moscow. This trend, reinforced by the US withdrawal from Afghanistan, echoes Russia's perception, which so-called Anaconda Ring conspiracy theory, which is deeply embedded in the Russian psyche. Russia wishes to thwart the Turkish influence in Azerbaijan, while Azerbaijan wants to maintain good relations with Russia. In response to the Shusha Declaration, Moscow is ready to grant Baku the status of partner or observer in the Common Security Treaty Organization, the CSTO, despite Armenia's objections. Actually, Russia and Turkey compete to entice Azerbaijan into their political place. My third point will be about the EU. The EU must play a more significant role in the resolution of these conflicts. The Black Sea and the Caucasus are part of the Eastern Partnership policy of the EU. The EU has developed a long-term strategy directed to create a secure political, economic, and social environment to its eastern border. In this framework, Ukraine, Georgia, and Moldova have signed an association agreement and a DCFTA. Armenia also signed an ad hoc comprehensive and enhanced partnership agreement, CEPA, that is compatible with the Armenian commitments within the Economic Eurasian Union. Azerbaijan, for its part, is negotiating a new framework agreement about partnership priorities. In Ukraine, Moldova, Georgia, and Nagorno-Karabakh, the EU is part, directly or indirectly, of the negotiations for the resolution of the conflicts. As for Nagorno-Karabakh, Russia did not invite either the EU or the two co-chairs, France and the United States, to negotiate the November 10th ceasefire. But I think that doesn't mean that Moscow wants to keep away the Minsk Group from the negotiations. I think that Moscow wants to keep this forum, particularly to negotiate the future status of Nagorno-Karabakh. Even if the EU is not a member of the Minsk Group, it always supported and continues to support the group's efforts. Additionally, the EEAS appointed in 2017 a new special representative for South Caucasus and Georgia's crisis, the Estonian diplomat Toivo Klaar. The November agreement for the ceasefire paves the way for further development in the Nagorno-Karabakh negotiations, which also could lead to the EU more important participation in the political settlement and the economic reconstruction. To conclude, if the EU wants to boost its diplomatic and political influence in the region and not remain only a soft power entity that provides financial and technical assistance, it must emerge as a geostrategic power in the region's new changing environment. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ambassador. And our next panelist is Mr. Alexander Iskandaryan, the director of the Caucasus Institute in Armenia. Sir, you have the floor for your 10 minutes. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you to organizers, New Strategy Center, for so brilliant possibility to be in your country and Bucharest, which I I've been several times. Thanks. Back to the topic. The last decade, I would say, has seen dramatic developments in the region I came from, South Caucasus. It has also seen a trend for constantly decreasing attention of external actors towards this region and arguably also toward the wider Black Sea region. At first glance, this doesn't ring true because violent conflicts in South Caucasus are often in the international limelight. For example, the 2020 war in Nagorno-Karabakh was a few weeks one of the top news stories in the media all over the world. However, there is a difference between international media attention and international engagement. Ethno-political conflicts illustrate this point well. If we look at the conflict around Georgia's breakaway entities, South Ossetia and Abkhazia, it has been clear since the 2008 Russian-Georgia war that these conflicts are likely to remain frozen for a long time. There is no room for meaningful negotiations of the fate of the de facto republics of South Ossetia and Abkhazia. The recognition by Georgia is ruled out, whereas Russia has recognized them and independent states and enables their existence by ensuring the non-resumption of hostilities of the ground. Russia refuses to engage in negotiations of intermediate solutions for the two conflicts since it believes to have resolved them. While the situation around Nagorno-Karabakh conflict is different, it is similar in terms of the low likelihood of a civilized solution. Since the Second Karabakh War, Azerbaijan has insisted that the conflict has been resolved. There is no longer any clarity concerning the status of the OSCE Minsk Group, which is supposedly in charge of peace talks in the conflict. And if the status of the de facto Nagorno-Karabakh Republic is no longer an issue of negotiations, what is? The de facto state exists, and just as the other two conflicts, Russian peacekeepers ensure the survival of its population and the non-resumption of hostilities. All of this has been due to the securitization of conflict resolution efforts. Securitization means that parties in conflict prefer military solutions to diplomatic ones. They invest in arms race, not peace building. Securitization also means that the only external players to engage in a conflict are the ones that have a security interests in the region. In the case of South Caucasus, the two players are Russia and Turkey. In our region, they engage in what the Russian political scientists call competitive cooperation, meaning a 19th century style competition for regional power, a classical geopolitical rivalry with a military dimension to it. As to the other external players, their engagement in the South Caucasus is limited to lip service by politicians, media, and human rights groups. In this context, the parties in conflict have no choice but to look for external military allies. European states and Western states in general are not an option. Again, this leaves Russia and Turkey. As a result of the last war, Armenia, even after revolution of 2018, has become more dependent on Russia, whereas Azerbaijan has become closer to Turkey in the military sphere than even before. As to the role of the West, it has further decreased, a point illustrated by the fact that Azerbaijan no longer agrees to sit down to talks under the auspice of the OSCE Minsk Group, co-chaired by US, France, and Russia. However, securitization does not address the underlying issues of the conflicts. For example, in the case of Nagorno-Karabakh, regardless of Azerbaijan's claims, The de facto republic still exists on the ground, even though its territory and population have been substantially reduced by the war. People who live there do not hold Azerbaijani passports or use the Azerbaijani language or currency. They have proclaimed the republic, elected their own authorities, and adopted a constitution. Whatever the last war did, it has not made them more likely to apply for Azerbaijani passports. So the problem is still there. Theoretically, one can construe two ways to make this problem go away. The first is to kill or deport those people, the way it was done on those parts of the de facto entity that Azerbaijan was able to reclaim as a result of the war. This would be in the spirit of military solution. The second is to talk to these people, because any diplomatic solution by means of negotiations requires talking to all stakeholders. However, taking rather than shooting requires experience and skills. Besides, neither the post-victory euphoria in Azerbaijan nor the post-defeat depression in Armenia put anyone in a mood to negotiate deals. However, the euphoria and the depression will go, but the problem will stay. Moving the region from the 19th century into 21st, from a geographically sealed fields of rivalry into a global modernized world requires preserving or recreating formats and tools for negotiating conflict resolution. This will require the engagement of other non-regional external actors with relevant experiences and motives. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. And last but of course not least, Ambassador Farid Shafiyev, Chairman of the Center of Analysis of International Relations in Azerbaijan. Ambassador, you have the floor.
Thank you very much. First of all, thank you for invitation. I'm first time in Romania and in this lovely city, Bucharest, at this important conference. So I would like to focus definitely on the conflict between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and just maybe in the end to speak about the South Caucasus as a whole. I divided my speech in three parts. I'll try to be short because in the shortness of time, probably to speak kind of the several points. And three parts, it's the past, present, and what future can be. Yes, we have, since 1988, there is the conflict which was developed under the Soviet Union. And after collapse of the Soviet Union, it became the conflict between two independent states, Azerbaijan and Armenia. There was a lot of discussion about last 2020 war. I just would like to remind that for 28 years, since 1992 until 2020, there was the negotiations under auspices of the OSCE Minsk Group co-chairs, institution which was established in 1992, but came to the fruition in 1997 under three co-chairs countries, United States, France, and Russia. In the 2007-2009, under auspices of these three co-chairs, parties, Armenia and Azerbaijan, agreed to so-called Madrid Principles, which stipulated the peaceful resolution of the conflict with the 6 points document. Unfortunately, despite numerous negotiations, Madrid Principles were never implemented. In the spring 2020, Armenian government under the leadership of Nikol Pashinyan abandoned the Madrid Principles, saying that they don't want to negotiate on the existing documents. They would like the new one. Even before, in 2019, Nikol Pashinyan said that should be, he said Nagorno-Karabakh is Armenia, basically terminating all negotiations about the status of Nagorno-Karabakh. So basically we're speaking that the conflict happened due to the failure of the negotiations and the three co-chairs. It should be also noted that all three co-chairs countries, France, Russia, and the United States, all have strong Armenian diasporas and certain interests. Out of this troika, only the United States had some security and energy interest with Azerbaijan. Overall, the group was not balanced, and there was no urge to resolve the conflict in the far corner of Europe. For Russia, it was the tool to control both countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan. Armenia is the member of Russian-led military union, CSTO, and also economic union. Azerbaijan is not member of any military alliances. So for Azerbaijan, the cooperation with Turkey was essential to balance Armenian-Russian alliance. It also should be noted that in 2016, after clashes between two countries, Russia basically forced Azerbaijan to stop military actions. And after that, even after promise that some progress will be made, no progress was achieved. Then we had, Armenia had revolution in 2018, and Russia delivered Iskander missiles to Armenia to strengthen its defense, its military capabilities. The situation now at present that Azerbaijan managed to liberate its occupied territories, according to the UN Security Council resolutions, which adopted in 1993, which stipulated that all occupying forces should be withdrawn from Azerbaijan territories. Now with the major countries in question, the United States is almost withdrawn from the region, and it began under Obama administration, continued under Trump administration, though the Biden administration announced that it will engage actively, but there is no clear vision. France, which was more or less neutral mediator in this troika, co-chairs under leadership of the President Macron, openly sided with Armenia, tried in new Security Council in the fall 2020 to adopt a presidential statement in favor of Armenia, but failed due to the support to Azerbaijan from non-alignment movement members. Russia now is the main actor on the ground. We have peacekeeping troops. I would say in long term, Russia maybe is not interested in the final solution, but it looks like at present, probably Russia is the most constructive actor, because Russia is indeed, looks like would like to facilitate opening of communication lines between Armenia and Azerbaijan. What is the future of the region? Again, I have to be short. I don't have time to elaborate on many other points. First, territorial integrity of all three states of the South Caucasus, including Armenia and Azerbaijan, should be preserved. This is what Azerbaijan offered to Armenia, to recognize each other's territorial integrity, and then open the communication lines. And these communications lines indeed can give access. Azerbaijan will have access, just I'll show on the map. Azerbaijan will have access. Can I have the back? Okay. Azerbaijan will have access to its Nakhchivan enclave. Yes, because now it's disrupted. And during the Soviet Union, we had railway, but also Armenia will have also through the all Soviet railways will have access to Iran, and then to Russia, and Russia will have access to Armenia. So it's the mutually beneficial projects. Another contentious issue is the need for delimitation and demarcation of the border between Armenia and Azerbaijan, cooperation in some other domains. Russia will remain one of the main actors of the region, and involvement of countries like Turkey is important for balancing, as a balancing power. There was suggestion about 6 countries, Caucasian agreement between 6 countries, free Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, and free Iran, Turkey, and Russia. There is definitely Azerbaijan also supported this initiative of President Erdogan, but we also understand that there is the very strong, there's a problem between Georgia and Russia. That's why we believe that the most important basis is the territorial integrity of all 3 countries of the region. And then on the basis of this, we can sort out, we can resolve some other issues, including the issues with the Armenian minority in Azerbaijan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for your presentation. And now we could sacrifice 10 minutes from our break. So if there are questions or comments or, I don't know, statements, we can proceed. So the floor is yours. So apparently there are not, but well, as a chair, I can use this privilege to ask the questions for the panelists. Well, one question for the first panel, for Mr. Munteanu, coming from Republic of Moldova, the situation is a little bit different. So, question for Igor Munteanu. You just mentioned that small step strategy, the Berlin strategy, is not very good for Republic of Moldova, not very helpful. And apparently it's a way towards disorganization of Republic of Moldova. What do you see the perspective of these policies? Having new government in Chisinau, and even the President Maia Sandu has somehow criticized these sort of policies. But either it was last year. So how do you see the perspective of negotiation with Tiraspol in these new circumstances? And for the rest of the panelists, how do you assess the Russian-Turkey relations in the South Caucasus? And because Turkey has been called a sort of, I don't know, necessary presence in South Caucasus in order to compensate somehow the presence of Russia. And how do you assess this presence of this sort of, I don't know, partnership or whatever you call it, having in mind that the Russian-Turkish relationship could be, I don't know, it's very, very, not necessarily ambiguous, but it's not necessarily a clear-cut partnership. So, the first speaker, please.
Thank you very much for your question. First of all, if you allow me, I will respond to your question by making a small detour. And the detour is related to the assumption made by Ambassador Andrieu that the conflict in Transnistria has been genuinely linguistic. That was not exactly the case. From the very beginning, it was a geopolitical project meant to undermine the aspiration of the Republic of Moldova to become a sovereign state. And later, and the second point was largely a patrimonialistic conflict, because Moscow wanted very much to keep under control the patrimony, properties, on the left bank of Dniester, keeping in mind the fact that 57% of the industry was located in Transnistria. 40% of the entire economical potential of the Republic of Moldova was in Transnistria. And of course, with large enterprises, very much focused on military arms manufacturing. And that was essential for Russia to be there and to afterwards, of course, exercise a never-ending influence and control over the rest of the Republic of Moldova. So it was not a linguistical, it was a patrimonial and geopolitical conflict. Nevertheless, soon I'll go to your question. I see very interesting analogies between Azerbaijan and Transnistria and Moldova. Why? In Shusha, in the last war, it was a call from Kremlin saying that no more advance. And the war stopped because Russia wanted to acquire a new role, a peacekeeping role in Azerbaijan. And that was exactly the compensation for stopping the war. It was absolutely a great analogy between Shusha case and 21st of July 1992, when the war was stopped in Bendere, the city of Tighina, by a call from the administration of Boris Yeltsin saying that, okay, this is our responsibility to stop the 14th Army, which was the most important military unit in the region. And afterwards, in a couple of probably 12 hours, Boris Yeltsin and Mircea Snegur negotiated a ceasefire agreement. In compensation for that, it was a peacekeeping operation installed in the Republic of Moldova, and the hegemony in the conflict settlement installed by the Russian Federation. And the Russian Federation sees that there is a kind of, how to say, denial policy. No participation of other actors in the settlement of the conflict. What you call 5+2 is simply a format allowing people to speak and talk, but not to influence the outcomes of this conflict. And speaking about the small steps, this is indeed kind of policy without ends, because the policy is putting a lot of incentives for the government of Moldova to provide concessions and to provide instruments for survival for Transnistrian regime without being compensated or rewarded by any kind of, how to say, democratization steps. We have people in jail in Transnistria, around 100 of individuals in jail because they disobey to the regime of Transnistria. And finally, Transnistrian elites, primarily the company Shafiyev, which is a monopoly in the private sector, has the unconditional access to the European market. 1 billion euros in exports every year to the European market without any kind of conditionality how to change their behavior in spirit of, how to say, step by step. So in my mind, humble opinion, there is no any kind of future for this kind of policy. Maia Sandu indeed made a statement in Kiev that this kind of small steps only pay rewards to the separatist regime without providing any kind of freedoms and independence to the citizens of Moldova. And I would like to make a short notice about the statistics. Out of 350,000 of inhabitants of Transnistria, Moldova has 300,000 of citizens. So what kind of conflict is this? Very strange. So they enjoy all the freedoms and liberties of the Republic of Moldova, including the benefits to trade with the European Union, without adapting themselves to the new circumstances. Russia is the actor that manipulates behind the doors, like in Shusha, like today, with some of the interesting high-level officials in the government of Gavrilidze, which pay undeserved services to the regime in Transnistria, unfortunately.
So your point is these policies will be used?
Yes.
So, okay. So wait and see, basically. So no clear answer to this. I mean, if this government are going to pursue these sort of policies. So wait and see. Okay, Russia and Turkey, Ambassador Pierre Andrieu.
Yes, I just want to answer to Ambassador Munteanu about his what he said. Unfortunately, in the very short time we had for this panel, I had no many time to elaborate about, of course, the Transnistria conflict. But of course, I should have added to linguistic, of course, economic reasons, but also geostrategic reasons. I agree with you totally. So that is okay. About what Ambassador Shafiyev told about the Nagorno, about the co-chairs, as a direct experience, I served as a co-chair during 3 years. The co-chairs are only mediators in the conflicts. In these conflicts, in other conflicts, we are still only mediators, and the result of the negotiations depends mainly of the goodwill and good faith of the partners, of both partners. And the discussions were very difficult because I think that both partners were not animated by good faith and goodwill. Also, what I've noticed during these negotiations, that in both among both partners, the internal political situations in their both country have an enormous influence on their position, and that is also very difficult. It's another difficulty for a good mediation and negotiations. About the future of the Minsk Group, I think that, as you are right when you told that the United States expressed his interest, but for the moment being nothing concrete has came. But I think because the United States wants to be present and be influent in the ex-Soviet space, still, I think they will come. Mr. Blinken and the president himself, he talked about this. And the Russian, anyway, I think they need the cooperation of the United States and the EU for the negotiations, good negotiations. About yes, thank you very much about speaking about this this railway project. The problem is, as I tried to explain, that the railway, the future railway, will pass through Azerbaijani and Armenian territories, but there is still an enormous problem of trust between the two countries, and really it's difficult to imagine in the present circumstances how it could work. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And very briefly, Ambassador Iskandaryan, you have the floor.
I said in my short presentation that in Russia they call this situation competitive cooperation, конкурентное сотрудничество. I like the term. It is a situation when Russians, they came to the game in the last minute, the end of the war, and the goal is to stay there and to stay there as a peacekeepers, because Russian way to impact on regions is security. And they did it. For that, they needed an entity, a body, a substantial something, because if your role is to peacekeep, you need to have somebody to peacekeep, somebody to secure. They did it. And now it is real competition, as you have, for example, between Russia and Turkey, between regional forces, actors, as you have, for example, in Syria, more or less the same, not the same in forms are different, but the phenomenon is the same, as you like somehow in Libya, etc. So this is a way of these countries to impact on the region. That's it, I would say.
Thank you, Ambassador Shafiyev.
Yeah, actually, it's a good term. I agree with my colleague Alexander Iskandaryan about term competitive cooperation. But if really that competition can be turned into cooperation, why not? And having said that, I just would like to further say about cooperation. The ambassador, Pierre Andrieu, also said about mistrust between two countries, Armenia and Azerbaijan, which is true. But what is kind of on the table, economic cooperation, especially in the transport area. Indeed, I would like to compare what was the idea between coal and steel agreement after the Second World War, which brought France and Germany and some Benelux countries together, and out of that we've seen the growth of European Union. Of course, it maybe now sounds very optimistic, but maybe not about speaking about union, but at least speaking about some cooperative terms in the Caucasus. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your patience. You still have 1 hour break. So let me thank to our panelists, excellent panelists, and let's applaud them for their excellent performance. Thank you very much.